The Old West, the lawless civilization that has inspired and captivated many generations with its tales of harrowing outlaws and brave lawmen, who made their mark and helped shape the legacy of the West and reinforce the American spirit of individualism. One of the most notorious, Butch Cassidy, was born in Circle Valley, Utah, as Robert Leroy Parker. He was the oldest of 13 children. His father, a frontiersman working on the California front, was constantly absent from Butch's life. When his father did return home, Butch was highly susceptible to his bad habits, including smoking and drinking, both of which were against their Mormon faith. The lack of parental guidance in Butch's early life sparked his love of independence and fostered his rebellious spirit. As time passed and he began his career as an outlaw, Butch Cassidy led the fight against large corporations in the East. Butch Cassidy's leadership among outlaws reinforced the view of the West, and his retaliation against oppression speaks true to our spirit of individualism. However, his legacy is controversial because his success was accomplished through many criminal acts.
To me, the most intriguing thing about outlaws in the West is why we idealized them so. What is the real attraction about folks like Butch Cassidy, Billy the Kid, Jesse James, and what makes them our heroes when they really are bad men?
It was in the early 1890s when Butch rose to power in the West. But in the East, a new power was forming. Large corporations were beginning to take root as individualism and the Industrial Revolution swept the nation in the wake of Reconstruction. Hardworking Americans were eager to leave their mark and change society into the new America everyone wanted. As a result, many big businesses took hold, and many Americans took factory jobs. These jobs are long, hard, and most oftentimes dangerous and with little pay. But Americans weren't the only ones taking advantage of these new job opportunities. In the mid-1800s, a wave of new immigrants came to America in hope of a new start. Many thought of America as a free nation where anything was possible. These new American citizens, however, began experiencing unexpected oppression as soon as they stepped foot on the mainland. Not only were the large corporations in New York and other New England states creating a monopoly across the eastern seaboard, but the corrupted American government seemed reluctant to say anything about it. The immigrants felt cheated and lost. They had come to America to live a free life, but had found only those with power were actually free, their new government evidently unwilling to help those affected by the power play between industrial giants. These Americans needed someone to give them a voice, and as the outlaws targeted big businesses in the West, their actions became glorified by the newspapers. Many of these newspapers were distributed across the nation, the stories reaching poor factory workers and others wronged by the oppression of big business. People idolized these brave outlaws, and their supporters in the East grew. As a result of the oppression, strikes broke out in cities, and strikebreakers were called in to regain control. One of these official groups was the Pinkertons. The Pinkertons were a group of strikebreakers founded by Allan Pinkerton, the son of a former police chief, and their main focus was the labor riots in New York. In time, they would turn towards being one of the most highly praised detective agencies. So effective, the FBI would be modeled off their practices. Many years later, the detectives of this agency would find their paths cross with Butch and his evasive gang, all the way across the country in Wyoming. When the Pinkertons moved into the Western Territories, pursuing outlaws and other wanted criminals, they were met with immediate distrust and even outright hostility.
And what's very interesting about it is that with respect to Wyoming, the Pinkertons weren't terribly popular. When the Wyoming Constitution was written in 1889, the delegates said, do we really want private armies that could be like the Pinkertons?
For now, however, they had a new target, Butch Cassidy himself. For years, Butch had managed to evade the law, mostly without incident. However, his career as an outlaw did not begin with robberies, but with cattle rustling. Butch left home at the age of 18 to work for a neighboring rancher, Mike Cassidy, who soon became Butch's idol. Mike was a well-known and experienced cattle rustler and had Butch assist him on more than one occasion. When Butch eventually left the Cassidy Ranch, he struck out on his own, settling for a period of time in Brown's Park, a well-known outlaw hideout. Years passed, and eventually the law caught up to him, and Butch was forced to flee from Brown's Park, heading to the closest hideaway, a notch in the sandstone cliffs near Casper, Wyoming, known as the Hole in the Wall. It provided safety for many of the most nefarious outlaws, and was effective because no lawman dared to go in, even in pursuit of a wanted criminal, for they were not able to determine if they were outnumbered. It is here that Butch became the leader of a gang made up entirely of the most hardened, dangerous criminals in the West, the Wild Bunch. When news of the Pinkertons spread to Butch, he quickly covered his tracks, but to no avail. In 1901, he was caught and sentenced to 18 months in the Wyoming State Penitentiary. He was released after only a year by the Wyoming State Governor, allowing him to continue his numerous heists. After Butch returned to the Wild Bunch, their dangerous hobby of train robbing increased, and soon after, the Tipton and Wilson train robberies were committed. For the most part, the outlaws targeted trains owned by large corporations because of the vast wealth that could be found aboard. However, the outlaws had little interest in the passengers aboard these trains and tended to leave them alone, but occasional robbings did occur nonetheless. This sudden burst in criminal activity soon became too much for the lawmen to handle on their own, and the detectives of the Pinkertons agency were called in for backup. It was about this time that newspapers began to notice the outlaws, and articles started appearing in many papers glorifying them and portraying them as individuals standing up against the oppression of big businesses. These articles, showing a more caring side of the outlaws, one the public had never seen before, sparked a new idea. Even though their success was achieved through crime, they might be accomplishing some good.
A lot of these outlaws, as it were, become celebrated figures because they are so unique. If everybody was like that, there wouldn't be much left of the West.
In effect, when the news reached the public of Butch's death in a Bolivian shootout in the early 1900s, many stories arose, some of which speculated he was still alive. All these newspaper articles and investigations have only strengthened the myths that Butch Cassidy and the West provide.
The reason that we know about people like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is there were so few of them, and they did some things that were against the law, but they weren't dangerous killers.
It is remembered this way because generations chose to remember the outlaws who helped give society the strength to rebel and question the corporatization of America. With the Pinkertons forever changing the Secret Service's system of operation and completely altering the modern-day police force guidelines of justice, their legacy will be remembered as one that achieved many unmatchable links in the world of crime. Alan Pinkerton being forever known as the Scottish Patriot, a man who began his magnificent career as someone who only wanted to follow his passion for detective work. Butch Cassidy being set in stone as one of the most notorious and well-known outlaws ever to step foot in the legendary Wild West. With the Wild Bunch by his side through his many years of successful heists, Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch have successfully helped maintain the view of the West as it has always been imagined. A rugged and beautiful place ruled by individualism, freedom from oppression, and a libertarian lifestyle. Today the world is a very different place than it was in the late 1800s. With lifestyles that have become more urbanized and fast-paced than ever before, there is no room for individualism in today's society and culture.
Well, again, I think that's part of the homogenization of American culture. And I would say that more and more we're all becoming more similar in what we think, feel, and how we dress and act. And I think that's definitely pushing the myth of the West and the reality of the West further into the background.
Movies and pop culture, however, have tried to recreate the liberty that the West once provided. This has occurred because the ever-strong desire for the legends of Butch Cassidy has never ceased to exist. The West is still seen as a place of free spirit and rugged individualism, and the libertarian lifestyle derived from the outlaws' rebellion against government authority continues today. The only things that are missing are Butch Cassidy and the other outlaws who once roamed its ever unrestrained plains.